Every revolution starts in the minds of the people. Arm yourself for the war of ideas. Take back your life. Take back your liberty. Tom Mullen Talks Freedom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tom Mullen Talks Freedom. Today is Tuesday, June 9th, 2026, and a lot of breaking news over the past few days. Some of it mildly amusing, most of it very disturbing, unfortunately. And I guess depending on the timing of me getting this podcast out, President Trump has announced today that the Iranians apparently have shot down. Well, I'll read his Truth Social post. It says, "I have just been informed by our great military," capitalized, "that last night the Iranians shot down one of our highly sophisticated Apache helicopters while patrolling over the Strait of Hormuz. There were 2 pilots involved. Both are safe and uninjured, thank goodness," my editorial. "Nevertheless, the United States must of necessity respond to this attack. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump." So very glad to hear the pilots are safe. Apparently, the helicopter was hit, they ejected, and hopefully they are, with their military units, or at least in not U.S. custody, whatever that term is, that they're not in Iranian custody. But apart from that, I mean, he's saying, oh my gosh, it's almost like, oh, this is such a shock. They shot down one of our helicopters. To which I say, yeah, that's what they do when you start a war with another country. They tend to shoot down your helicopters and sink your ships if they can. They haven't sunk a U.S. ship as far as we know yet. I think they've damaged some far more than the U.S. government has admitted. But so is this just an excuse for him to go back to escalating the war, or is he going to do some limited response? We don't know. He says, nevertheless, the United States must of necessity respond to this attack. No, it really doesn't have to. It's not like this evens the score by any means. You bombed this country for 40 days, starting while you had your hand out to shake it in peace negotiations. You sneak attacked them like the Japanese did the United States at Pearl Harbor in 1941, and then bombed them for 40 days with no provocation whatsoever. And please spare me the 47 years they've been at war with us. So yeah, you could just let this go. We lost a helicopter. Our guys are okay. That's what's most important. And now we could just send some more money to the defense contractors to build us another helicopter. This should be win-win for everybody. But of course, he may use this as an excuse for further escalation. So I wanted to just point out, I think we're right around just past day 100. I believe that Meet the Press interview that I want to talk about, I believe that might have been conducted on day 100 or very close to it of the war. That Trump once said that the U.S. had won in the first 48 hours. So he said that they had won by March 2nd. And here we are, June 9th. And some of the things that he says in the interview, and regardless of the dust up, maybe we'll deal with the dust up first, because it was kind of hilarious in one way, but it's kind of grating in another. So Trump had a long interview, it was supposed to be longer, with Meet the Press, and Kristen Welker, the journalist, was the person interviewing the president. And it's funny because she asked him a lot of, decent, relevant questions at the beginning about where we are in the war, how much of their military capabilities are left, what shape are they in, what shape is the supreme leader in, what do you know, what do you not know. I mean, I thought it was all relevant stuff that would be useful to hear. And then, of course, she confronted him with a perfectly legitimate question about whether he broke his promise not to get the United States into no new wars. So we'll get to that. But none of this ended the interview. What ended the interview was she started down the road of talking about January 6th defendants, that whole weaponization fund where they were going to compensate people for being, you know, mistreated or wrongly accused and other issues. And she starts saying, you know, are you okay with people who were convicted getting taxpayer dollars? And I'll read a few segments. And she said, you'd be okay. Like, these are people that were convicted for something to do with January 6th, 2021. And she says, you'd be okay with them receiving tax dollars? And Trump responds, the people were destroyed by dirty cops and weaponization. Many of those people should be compensated. Now, with that being said, as I understand it, the weaponization fund was going to set up a group of people that could be picked by anybody, fair people, smart people, and they will go on an individual case basis. And Welker says, okay. And Trump says, no, I don't know what's going to happen with the weaponization fund. I love the idea because people like you, the fake, dirty press, the crooked press, people like stupid Biden, he's not smart enough to know what's going on. But people that surround him, surrounded his beautiful, resolute desk in the Oval Office, what they did to the lives of these people, they destroyed people. They sent people to jail who did nothing wrong. And then Welker, of course, has to come in, doesn't know how to manage the client. All right, this is, just to be very clear, there's no evidence of what you're saying, but let me ask you about Todd Blanche. And then right there, that's it. The interview is effectively over. And Trump starts arguing. There's a lot of evidence. He's never going to get off this at this point, right? And of course, it's going to end up being about the 2020 election and how that was stolen. And Welker now just keeps trying to, you know, get the interview out. She wants to talk about somebody named Todd Blanche. I don't even know who that is. And then Trump's 4 or 5 questions in about Todd Blanche. Trump's still talking about the election. The election was rigged. It was a dirty election, and it's happening again in California. Now he's on to the LA mayor race in California. And this is the one where there is a supposed conservative named Spencer Pratt that was running for mayor of LA. Okay. And then the way they do it is you have multiple candidates and the last 2 go to a runoff, or at least that's the way it's going to be this year. And Pratt was in second place. And he was ahead of this Nithi Raman. And I don't know anything about these people. I don't care anything about these people. Nobody outside of California should really care who the mayor of LA is. But looks like I had a little visitor like on my face. Oh, there he is. Anyway, I don't know if any of you saw the perpetrator, but he left behind some webbage. Anyway, this Nithya Raman was behind Spencer Pratt by 40,000 votes, I guess. And a whole bunch of ballots came in at the last minute. You know the drill, right? And now she's ahead. And the vote counts, she's got like 196,000. Pratt's got 193,000. And let's see, do they tell us what Karen Bass is? 250,000. So Karen Bass is way out in the lead, but it's yet to be determined who Karen Bass is going to run against for LA mayor. And so everyone's screaming, oh, look, see, they're doing it again. And make no mistake, I think all these elections are fishy. I think Trump's in 2020 was fishy. Can I prove that, you know, it was still? No, I have no idea. There's so much chain of evidence that's beyond anybody's ability to verify that, you know, it just looks bad. And I wouldn't be surprised if all the votes were valid, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they were thousands and thousands of votes and maybe more. I mean, over the whole election, maybe a lot more. I don't know. People in nursing homes, like my mom was until she passed away in 2024, had no idea what day it was. And, you know, people with dementia, people who may not be in full-blown dementia like our, previous president, but people who, really probably wouldn't vote don't think much about the election, and a whole bunch of helpful people going around, and they're still eligible voters and filling out their votes for them. I have no evidence of that. I'm just saying I wouldn't be surprised at that. And we had a very big spike in the number of voters in the last two elections. Like we had 62,000 or million for Trump against Hillary. She had 65 million. And then all of a sudden, both candidates in the last two elections are well into the 70s. You could say that's because the political environment is very contentious, more contentious than it used to be. Okay, that's plausible. But I think they're all fishy. But I think it's very possible Biden really won. Maybe not all those 80 million votes were real, or some of them were the kind I just mentioned, homeless, people with dementia, people who really, I mean, when you mail out these ballots, you just don't know how they changed hands, right? They could be a legitimate ballot for someone who never would have voted, and then someone fills it out for them and mails it in. So very fishy. But anyway, so Trump's on tilt at this point. He's never going back to the interview, and he's just getting ready to he's like a rocket on the launch pad. They're like only at the count is like 7, 6, 5, and the rockets are already firing, but they're not lifting off yet because it takes a while. That's where he is. He's about to lift off. And he goes on, he's arguing about the votes in California. Oh, and let me just say one more thing. The thing I think is important about this election for LA mayor is there's no way Pratt was ever going to win. Even if he gets into the runoff, you would have to believe that the 200,000 votes that went for the third place person in that scenario, which would be Rahman, we're all going to vote for the conservative instead of Karen Bass. And that's just ludicrous to believe that even a majority were going to vote for Pratt instead of the liberal, the progressive in LA, So anyway, I'm getting back to the transcript here, the interview. And so they're back and forth, and he just starts hurling insults at Welker, who, I'll tell you, there's nobody who works for the mainstream cable news network that doesn't deserve to be insulted. But Trump, he has no wit. He has no style. Even when he's saying something that you might somewhat agree with, he always does it in the most cringeworthy way. And we've had to deal with this. And I think I've mentioned this before on a previous podcast, but it's like we put up with all that. When Trump was saying, I think when he was calling the COVID the China virus, and they said, well, why are you calling it the China virus? And he said, because it came from China. And the reporter asked, well, isn't that racist? And he said, no, it's the truth. I mean, stuff like that was great because even though he's a clumsy goof and he can't even complete a sentence, at least he was on the right side of some of that stuff. Now, I should say, calling it the China virus or that it came from China, there's a lot of iffy there as well, unless we're now counting Anthony Fauci as Chinese. But regardless, we knew the explanation at the time was not true. And so, but now he's not on the right side of the issue. So now we have this stumbling, inarticulate goofball, embarrassing, cringy, and he's wrong too. And I mean, that just makes it harder to bear. Although I got to admit, the end of the interview was hilarious because they both come off so badly. I mean, Trump's calling her fake news and you're crooked and Meet the Press is crooked. And Kristen Welker's like, to be fair, I'm not crooked, but let's continue. And he goes, really? Well, you play right into their hands then. Let's continue. You're either crooked or you're stupid. So, I mean, the man just has no decorum, like no self-control. All right. But again, I mean, the target, I don't feel bad for her. And what's funny is at one point they're going back and forth. He's on the election now. Now he's on his own. He's back on 2020 again, which he had got off of for a while. And he's arguing about that. And he says, you're a one-sided crooked network. Sorry, let's call it quits because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time. And again, what does have a good time mean? I mean, he's just such an idiot. He has no control over even the words that he says. Have a good day, maybe, in a snarly way is, the way you it's just he's just awful. And then she's pleading with him, "Mr. President, please, I traveled all the way to Wisconsin." And Trump's like, "Well, I sat in the rain with you." And she's like, I know, I traveled all the way. And he says, "I sat in the rain with you for an hour again." And she goes, "To Wisconsin." So it's like Kristen Welker, the fact that she had to lower herself to go to Wisconsin seems to be like the only thing that's bad about this for her. She's like, "Oh my God, I'm going to have to soak myself in iodine for a week. I've been out there. I think some of these Wisconsiners have breathed on me." So, like, for her, it just can't, I mean, all right, I'm sure she denied that's what she meant, but that's the way it came off. And it's just hilarious. That's what she's worried about, that he's terminating the interview, which, like, any reasonable person would know is going nowhere. You tilted him way back then. You can blame that on him. And he, of course, has responsibility for his actions. But if I were interviewing Trump, I think I would do a better job of knowing what not to say if I wanted to get information from him. Again, I'm not worried about defending him. Heck, I think the guy's a goofball. I tell him that. Well, I wouldn't tell him that before I got my last answer. Put it that way. And this no evidence. Well, you have no evidence for that. Okay, maybe true, but you know that's Trump stated without evidence. Like, they never used to say that about any other president who slung just as much bullshit as Trump, just not as inarticulately. And but all of a sudden they started that with Trump. So yeah, I mean, that was it. So, so I thought the end was hilarious, though. I mean, I'm just picturing Kristen Welker like in a plastic bag on the way back to the airport. I guess she probably flies private, but oh my God, don't let any more of these Wisconsiners breathe on me. I might catch something. So let's get to the substance of what he said early on. So, I mean, early, she's asking some questions about details. Do you know how the supreme leader's doing? Have you talked to him directly? No, I haven't. Did you say you wanted to meet with him? Yeah, I would like to, if he would like to. Trump tries to give him like some props, saying, I understand he's badly injured. And he says there's some bravery there. So trying to, at least set the stage maybe for, look, we're at war, but we're respected enemies, some bullshit like that. So it finally gets down to, what about the deal? Okay. So Trump has been saying that they're very close to a deal for since they stopped bombing, like whatever that was, 40 days, somewhere in April, right? When the ceasefire started. And here's what he said just a couple days ago. I mean, I think we're very close. We have a couple of points. They don't even seem like big points. They've conceded the fact that they will not have nuclear weapons. We had a clause in there that they will not develop nuclear weapons, and everybody was very happy with it, except me. And I said, well, what happens if they do not develop, but they go out and purchase, they acquire? I want to put in the word if they buy or purchase or acquire. You've got to have that in there because that's not developing. So they don't have the right to develop or purchase or acquire or buy. So Trump is making it out like this is some breakthrough. Iran has agreed not to have nuclear weapons for over 20 years. The U.S. intelligence community, for whatever they're worth, has confirmed in published reports as late as a few months ago that they have not tried to make a nuclear weapon in 20 years. This is not on the table. This was never on the table. So what the U.S. demands have been is that they stop enriching even for the purposes of their energy programs and medical isotope programs, if they have them, but definitely energy. And it's different than they won't develop a weapon. All right. So if he uses this and walks away, that's fine. I don't think he'll get away with that, honestly, because everyone knows that they've been agreeing not to have a nuclear weapon. Now, you could say you don't believe them, but getting them to agree not to have a nuclear weapon, that's retarded because they've been doing that over and over for more than 20 years. Publicly, they have the fatwa against it. You can scoff at that if you like. Well, you can't call them Muslim extremist fundamentalists and also say the fatwa doesn't mean anything. You can't have it both ways. Okay. I think the fatwa does mean something. That's why they have debates about it in Iran, because the new leader is saying, well, if it's a matter of our survival, can we put the fatwa aside? Right? They wouldn't be having that debate if the fatwa didn't mean something. So the U.S. has been demanding, and I think I've said this before, at least in writing, if not on a podcast, that Iran give up all enrichment. You can't enrich it all. And the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, to which Iran is a signatory, as well as the United States, calls enriching for energy and other peaceful purposes an inalienable right. So the United States is demanding, on threat of obliteration if they don't do it, that Iran give up an inalienable right under the treaty that both the U.S. and Iran has signed. So that's the non-starter. They're never going to do that. They've never intimated that. They've never said, yeah, maybe we will. Never. They've been clear from the beginning. We will keep enriching for peaceful purposes. Now, the 60% enriched uranium that they possess, that they enrich to 60%, is not enriched enough to make a weapon. But it's a lot closer to the 80 or 90% you needed enriched to make a weapon. And let's just take the U.S. government's word that the amount they have is enough to make 11 bombs. Okay. They obviously did this as a leverage point. And also as a security matter, like, okay, look, we're not going to make a nuclear bomb right now, but we're going to enrich uranium to the point where we could do it a lot faster if things go south. Now, they did that before this war started. I want to say they did it in response to Israel sabotaging their nuclear plants several years ago. And then they said, well, what we're going to do in response to this is we're going to enrich to 60%. That's not weapons grade, but it allows us to get to a weapons grade a lot faster if the aggression doesn't stop. And the aggression didn't stop. And as far as we know, they haven't enriched any farther. Trump claims they've obliterated everything and they can't do it. I don't believe that. I think they're crazy if they don't. I think they're crazy to obey this fatwa. I mean, this is an existential threat for them. And if they had a nuclear weapon, I think things would be a lot more stable there. I know everyone's going, oh, are you kidding me? Iran? Iran has been the reasonable party in this exchange. So let's talk about so they have enough uranium enriched to 60%, where if they took it to 80 or 90%, whatever it needs to be, they can make 11 bombs. Let's assume that. Now, of course, they have to also have the delivery systems and the detonation system. So you don't just have the uranium and boom, you have a bomb, stick a fuse in it and light it. Okay. There's a lot that goes in to making a weapon that will work that they also have to do. Now, let's say they could do that too. And they arrive and they get their 11 nuclear weapons. Now what? I'm going to tell you what Trump said would happen in a minute. But just remember that Israel has at least 200 nuclear weapons and maybe 300. And the United States has somewhere between 3,800 and 4,500 thousands of nuclear weapons. And they would have 11. And Trump said that, when she asked him, did you break your promise to not get into any new wars? He says, no. And he said, no, I had to stop a country, very powerful, very dangerous country, from having a nuclear weapon because they'd use it. They'd blow up the world. They'd blow up the Middle East. They'd blow up Israel. They'd come here, United States, Wisconsin. They'd blow up Europe. They're nuts, okay? They're crazy people. I deal with them. And very high-strung people, little crazy, and I get along with them. I like them. but you don't want to let them have a nuclear weapon. And I'm doing the world a service, but I'm doing our country a service. You know, it's America first. I'm doing our country a service. So look at, we've always, taken whatever comes out of Trump's mouth and qualified or filtered his idiotic statements, right? But what do you say when somebody starts mentioning places? So, I mean, at least he's saying they would deploy these weapons against the Middle East, Israel. So I guess he means both Israel and the Gulf states. They're all in the Middle East. They'd come here to the United States. So they hit us with a nuclear weapon. They'd blow up Europe. So, so really the whole world outside of Asia, he mentions, I don't know if he just omitted them by, not intentionally, but in any case, with their 11 nuclear weapons, they're going to do all this damage. So, well, that begs the question, then why if you could blow up the whole world, or you could at least hit, you know, how many is this? 4 of the 7 continents and all these countries with 11 nuclear weapons, why does the United States need 3,800 of them or 4,000 of them? Why does Israel need 200 or 300 of them? So, nuclear weapons are terrible, they're devastating, but there is a limit to what they can do. And you would have to believe that with these 11 weapons, Iran could cause all this catastrophic damage. Now, the answer to the question of why does the United States need 3,800 is because it would take that many to effectively defeat the old Soviet Union in a nuclear war. And the Soviets had a comparable amount or more. And you have to take into account some of them are going to be successfully shot down by defense systems. Some of them aren't going to explode. Some of them, whatever, miss their targets. So you need a lot more than 11 to really do damage. I mean, it wouldn't be a good thing if they were to hit a major city anywhere with a nuclear bomb. But there is absolutely no reason to believe. I mean, at this point, of course, after we've watched them operate for the last 4 months, March, April, May, and 3.5 months, that they have a death wish, that they would just blow up a city knowing that their country would be a parking lot within minutes afterwards. And it's just a ludicrous argument. What they would have with 11 nuclear weapons is possibly a deterrent against the constant aggression against them, the real aggression for the last 73 years against them by the United States, and since Israel's been around, by Israel, and really Israel more in the last few decades. So, the whole argument is ludicrous. There was never any danger from the Iranians. They weren't trying to make a weapon. All kinds of people that Trump appointed in his own administration told him that. And they also told him this war was going to be a disaster for the reasons we've talked about here on the podcast before. So he tries to wiggle out of the fact that he didn't break his promise not to start a new war. And she says, so you're saying you didn't break your promise, and yet, Mr. President, in your first term, you held to that promise, and it was so fundamental to who you were as a candidate to a first-term president. What changed? Because you insisted no new wars. And Trump says, well, first of all, I didn't guarantee no war. Why would I have built the strongest military in the world? I built our military. I don't know. I'm not going to read the rest of this. It's just, I'm going to post a link to the transcript. I highly recommend that you read the transcript if you want all the information and don't watch the video. It's just painful. Every moment on screen with this buffoon is now painful because there's no good coming out of him. He's a net negative for having been elected. What can we give him credit for? I think I've always given him credit for the Remain in Mexico policy. That's it. And Biden got rid of that. Trump put it back in. It's a good policy. It should curb illegal immigration quite a bit because it goes right to the heart of where most illegal immigration occurs, which is petitions to be a refugee where people just don't show up. and they just disappear. And so now they can't just disappear because they're still in Mexico. So good policy. Against that, everything else has been a complete catastrophe. And the very worst thing is he did the one thing he wasn't supposed to do. He did the one thing that possibly could have made him better than the previous presidents of this century and maybe in my lifetime. And he did it. Now he's worse. I mean, I've definitely got him worse than Obama at this point. And Bush, that's a tough call. There's a lot of time now. So, you tend to forget the guy did, start two big, huge ground wars, which were both a complete failure, disaster, right? So, I mean, you got to kind of count the bodies and count the, the negative impact that was done. Probably Bush was worse. But yeah, I mean, Trump's definitely worse than Obama. That's for sure. Biden, well, I don't know. He's worse than Biden because here's the thing. What I was thinking when he was running against Biden in 2024 is like, look, Trump has made it abundantly clear he's Israel's bitch, and he still is. And he's not going to push back against any of the stuff going on in the Middle East. We're funding it as taxpayers. A lot of us object to funding it. That's going to continue. But he's definitely making noises like getting out of Ukraine or putting an end to that. And at least the U.S. ceasing to fund it and maybe making a peace deal there, brokering a peace deal. Now, again, that's another imperial delusion that U.S. is brokering. The U.S. is a party to the war, but we've been through that before. But at least if it ended and our funding of it ended, then that would be a plus over Biden because it wasn't going to end under Biden. I thought, well, Israel equal, Middle East equal, Eastern Europe, Trump better. And not great, but marginally better. And of course, now he's way worse than Biden in the Middle East. And really, Ukraine, war still going on. I don't know that the U.S. the U.S. is still funding it as we speak, I think, for money that was passed in the past. If you know what I mean, passed previously. So PASSED in the PAST. So there's still money flowing there, but I don't believe there's going to be more when whatever's been passed already has been done. And Europe's picking up the slack and trying to help Ukraine escalate with these strikes, drone strikes inside anything from Russia. You start a war, maybe the U.S. started it, but you get in a war, they get to attack your homeland. Iran has every right to bomb military installations here in the United States. That's how war works. You bomb their country, they can bomb yours. They just don't have the capability to do it. But they'd certainly have every right. But if they did it, you would probably think they dropped a nuke. It's just incredible, delusional state of the empire in addition to its arrogance, to its evil. It's just, a lot of us were hoping Trump would at least make scratch something, the surface of that, and something would be different. He's made everything worse. I'm just calling balls and strikes here. I voted for the buffoon. So he goes on, why would I build a military if I wasn't going to use it? And then the only other thing I think that's noteworthy in this interview, and I wonder if he believes it or not, when he says we've eliminated them, we've devastated their country, and she tries to get at, well, how much of their missile capability is left? Oh, it's almost all of it's gone, right? It's all gone. And somehow or other, they mutually arrive at the number of 22%. Now, so this is the supposedly top news source in the United States. Hold your hilarious laughter till the end. Talking to the president of the United States, and they're both signing off on 22%. When the United States' own intelligence community, people that Trump appointed, say it's more like 78% of their capability is left. In other words, the 22 is what they destroyed, not what's left. So I don't know if Trump has that number mixed up in his head or if he's in a bubble and, only a few people get to go see the president in any administration. That's why you have a chief of staff. The chief of staff filters the people who want to see the president and schedules the appointments with the people that the chief of staff wants to see the president. So who knows what Trump knows? He's out golfing, which I have no problem with if he wouldn't make decisions based on not knowing what the fuck he's talking about. And again, if he is getting this from Pete Hegseth, you know what he's going to tell him. But this stuff is independently verifiable. And the bottom line is he keeps saying that they have to agree to these last demands where, Iran, every time he says this, Iran says, no, we're not gonna, and then they retaliate. But if they don't do that, we're going to destroy them militarily. And I mean, we're so far past the point where anyone takes that seriously. And it's incredible to watch this late where, and as I've said, to me, and I have an episode earlier in the podcast, and I think it's in April, that we're already in the post-Iran war period, meaning the Iran's already won the war. Iran won the war when they closed the Strait of Hormuz and bombed all the U.S.'s military bases. That was it. That was the end. Like the Revolutionary War, they had Yorktown. That was in 1981. They didn't sign the treaty till 83. Did I say 1981? I meant 1781. And then they signed the treaty till in 83. So it's 2 years after they had the last real battle. And there was a little shooting after that, but there was pretty much, that was it. Once they lost at Yorktown, the Brits had no stomach for more. They were beating everybody else in this big, huge world war. And they're like, their parliament's like, just get out. So they finally signed this treaty 2 years later. And that's where we are right now. Yorktown is over for the Iranians, right? They've destroyed all the bases that previously surrounded them on their borders. They've closed the Strait of Hormuz and they're not opening it. And if Trump could have opened it last month or last week or 2 months ago, he would have. He can't. It's not a matter that he's holding back. It's not a matter that he's a humanitarian and he just, wants to exhaust all opportunities. If that was the case, he would have exhausted them all before he bombed them for 40 days. Okay? They've won the war. It's over. It's been over for a long time. And it's just a matter of how long Donald Trump's going to go on with this song and dance about being close to a deal and then threatening to blow them up. And then right at the last minute saying we're close to a deal again. No one's buying it anymore. The Iranians are just basically just telling them to F off. And that's where we're at. So the problem is that we've got a lot of economic pain in the fall baked in because of what's happened so far. And I don't think Trump's going to escalate it farther. Although, there's a possibility that today this helicopter thing will provide him an excuse to just go all the way again. But I kind of think he doesn't want to do that because Iran will just destroy Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. They'll destroy all the oil production in the Middle East. And then it won't be, we've got pain coming in the fall, but it's better by the spring. It'll be, we're in a depression for years while they try to rebuild 20% of the world's oil production. So I don't think it's going to escalate. I hope he doesn't. But the war's over. I think let's leave it there. I'll post a link to this transcript. They might have some video on the page with the transcript. Let me see. They have video of something. I don't know if they have the video of the whole interview. I highly suggest not watching the whole interview because it'll only make you dumber. And my audience is smart, I get your emails, so I know that you guys are, even when I don't agree with you, you're arguing in an intelligent way, unlike the president of the United States. So, it will do you no good to actually watch the footage. You might read the transcript, and to be honest with you, that's rather painful as well. Read the end first, because that part's pretty funny. And hopefully, Kristen Welker has not been permanently damaged by her exposure to actual Americans in Wisconsin. I know that could be highly toxic to a liberal socialist elite like herself. So we'll leave it there. And I thank you for listening. Hey, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast, make sure you do so. And there is a video version. I know most of you listen probably in the car like I do. I never watch videos, but there is a video version if you like that sort of thing. There's a link on the show notes page to the YouTube version of this podcast. Share that with your friends, and we'll see you next time on Tom Mullen Talks Freedom.
The war of ideas has only just begun. Arm yourself with the knowledge you need by heading to TomMullenTalksFreedom.com and subscribing to our email list. And remember, every revolution starts in the minds of the people.